guys, welcome back. And you know what I've noticed lately? We just don't cover enough weird beat-em-ups on this channel. And I love weird beat-em-ups. I did make a video late last year that looked at some of the more obscure Super Nintendo brawlers, but those were back when I was doing like these really short reviews, and honestly, no one actually watched it anyway. So this week we're gonna fix that problem by checking out some of my favorite and a couple of my least favorite weird and or obscure brawlers on the Super Nintendo. Plus, I just need an easy week this week, and beat-em-ups are like my favorite games to cover on YouTube anyway. So let's get things rolling with an early 90s cartoon and toy line that should have probably never existed, but of course somehow did and ended up getting a Super Nintendo game as well. The Stone Protectors for the Super Nintendo might just be the most aggressively bad 90s video game that you're gonna see all week. Real quick though, I need a show of hands on just how many of you ever looked at a troll doll and thought, yeah, but what if it was a roided up action figure that fought evil trolls? And yes, I am fully prepared for someone to assault me in the comments below about how Stone Protectors was their greatest childhood memory, but let's be honest here, none of us ever had that thought.
With a jewel you can wish on.
Still, in true early 90s fashion, a company called Ace Novelty teamed up with Deke Entertainment and decided that's exactly what all of us kids needed. So in 1993, we were set upon by the Stone Protectors, a full-blown cartoon and toy line aimed at kids who thought troll dolls just weren't extreme enough. Unsurprisingly though, none of us kids really cared, and the toy line and the cartoon vanished within a year. Hell, the cartoon only managed 13 episodes, and to tell you how bad that was back in the early 90s, the Kid and Play cartoon managed more episodes than that. But amazingly enough, that still didn't stop them from giving us one last taste of the Stone Protectors in video game form.
Power glow.
Stone Protectors hit the Super Nintendo back in 1994, clearly trying to appeal to anyone who'd listen at this point. There was even a promise of a free tattoo inside the box. And I'm just gonna say right now that if any of you back in the early 90s was deranged enough to actually be rocking a Stone Protectors temporary tattoo, you need to tell me in the comments below because we need to be friends. And to be fair, just looking at the back of the box, even if you had zero interest in these guys, which most of us did, you might have thought that it had some potential. The graphics looked bright and colorful, and if the Stone Protectors was gonna work anywhere, it was gonna be in a two-player co-op beat-em-up. And yeah, just like the back of the box promised, it does actually really look good. And let's just get that out of the way right now, because the moment you start the game up, you're hit with a fully animated 2-minute long intro that lays out the entire origin story of these little goobers. And honestly, look at this, like it's surprisingly good. They went really hard with this. And even the stages pop with a bright Saturday morning cartoon aesthetic that not many Super Nintendo games outside of Turtles in Time really nailed. And yes, that is the only time you're going to hear me compare Turtles in Time to this game. The characters even look exactly like their disgusting, meaty cartoon versions, and the animation is genuinely good across the board. Even their little idle animations are really fun. So presentation-wise, I'd give this a solid 8, even if the Stone Protectors themselves just kind of make me want to dry heave every time they're on the screen. But unfortunately, and as with most Eurocom developed games at the time, things start to fall apart the second you try to do anything with this game besides look at it. And as soon as I started trying to punch stuff with my Stone Protector of choice, I instantly saw why this wasn't making anyone's top 10 lists. Everything in this game feels laggy in a way that no beat-em-up ever should. Even basic attacks feel delayed, like they'll either stall mid-swing or just not register at all. And I think that's because the game lets you charge up stronger moves by holding down the attack buttons, but the timing's so fidgety that you have to just jam on the button or the game just assumes you're trying to hold the button down. It turns every punch into a guessing game, and that's not what you want in a brawler. It doesn't help that this is also one of those beat-em-ups where the hit detection is just all over the place. Sometimes you'll miss an enemy standing right next to you, and other times you'll land a punch from like 3 feet behind them. There's no real consistency to the combat. It's stuttery and just feels weird, and not in a good kind of way. It's just a really odd feeling brawler all around. As mentioned, Stone Protectors does include 2-player co-op, and honestly, that's probably the best way to play it. It's not gonna fix the game, but it might at least make the experience a little more tolerable. And one interesting thing the game does, something that you almost never saw back then, is it lets you play with an AI companion if you don't have a second player around. And yeah, that is a neat feature in theory, but you'll probably wish you were just playing solo as soon as you see just how bad the AI actually is. Half the time they just stand there waiting to get punched before doing anything. And the developers must have known that this was a problem too, because you can literally pause the game and donate some of your health to keep them alive, since they're just too dumb to manage it on their own. So yeah, if you're planning to marathon stone protectors, maybe bring a friend, preferably one that's easily entertained. Now, I am not going to be the person on YouTube who seriously suggests that any of you go out and play stone protectors on the Super Nintendo. Outside of some great cartoony graphics, this just isn't a very good game. But if you're like me and have some mild brain damage and find weird joy in early 90s curiosities, then maybe it's actually worth it just because of that. So no, don't play Stone Protectors because it's good. Play it because it's a forgotten curiosity from a time that all of us 90s kids loved. Oh, wait, real quick. You need to see the Japanese box art for this game. I take everything back. 10 out of 10. Sonic Blastman for the Super Nintendo punched your whole damn face off in this surprisingly decent Super Nintendo sequel that very few people ever played. Now, if you would have told me back in the 90s that Sonic Blastman of all games would end up getting a sequel, I would have probably been the only kid in North America actually excited about it. The original was a strange one-off brawler where Sonic Blastman wandered the streets, punching and shaking enemies so hard that it just looked like their bones exploded. Personally, I liked it a lot, but I can't deny that it was pretty slow and repetitive, even by Super Nintendo brawler standards. The arcade version of Sonic Blastman was actually kind of interesting though. It wasn't a traditional beat-em-up, it was literally just a game where you had to hit a punching bag as hard as you could to progress. And as you can imagine, that thing was broken as soon as drunk college kids started swinging baseball bats at it. Still though, that's totally the kind of weirdo stuff at the arcade that I liked anyway. So no, Sonic Blastman really never caught on in the US, in arcades or on consoles. But that didn't stop some madman at Taito from believing in the big guy, because somehow we actually got a sequel. Sonic Blastman 2 dropped on the Super Nintendo back in 1994 to what must have been an audience of about 8 people, because I never saw this thing as a kid, and I was literally the only person that would have probably been interested in it. And yeah, just one look at the back of the box would have been all I needed to fill them pants, because this was exactly what I wanted the first game to be. So let's see if this one actually delivers, or if it's just winding up for another swing and a miss. Start the game up and you now get 3 whole characters to choose from. Of course, Sonic Blastman is here with his Sonic Blastman boobs, but this time he's also joined by a generic Guile knockoff with cybernetic arms who fills the heavy hitter role, along with the token female character who's the fastest of the group and comes equipped with fire attacks and of course some fast kicks. All of them are actually pretty capable fighters, so feel free to pick whichever superhero reject you fancy. Now, before you get too excited, let's set some expectations here. This isn't Final Fight 3. Gameplay-wise, this is just a straight-up brawler with very little to get you sweaty, besides just how ridiculous the whole concept of it is. But Sonic Blastman 2 is still surprisingly better than it has any right to be. Just moving around and throwing punches actually feels good in this game. Instead of Sonic Blastman lumbering around at slow power walk speeds from the first game, you're now blasting enemies across the screen with some actual maneuverability this time. While you still don't walk around super fast, you at least get a dash move this time, and even better, a roll that sends you across the screen. The roll in particular is great for getting behind enemies and just keeping yourself out of trouble when things get too crowded. I've said it before and I'll say it again, beat-em-ups live or die by their pacing, and Sonic Blastman 2 actually gets that part right as long as you use the tools that the game gives you. Each character also gets a set of powerful special moves by activating them with the L button and then pressing the corresponding face button to unleash Sonic Blast Hell. These can either be simple projectiles or massive attacks that wipe out most of the enemies on the screen, but they cost power points, shown as a number next to your health bar. You start with 5, but you can build up to 20, basically turning you into an unstoppable blasting machine. I actually really like this system a lot since it's one of the few beat-em-ups that doesn't pull from your overall health bar to use specials, and I've always hated that trade-off in other games. If I've got one big gripe with the game, it's that it's just not as ridiculous as it probably should be. I mean, this is literally a game about alien mutants attacking Earth, so I feel like we need a few more strange enemies than what we get. Most of these dudes just feel like bootleg Power Ranger putties, and only a handful of the enemies later in the game actually look like something that you'd call a mutant. When a full-on dinosaur shows up out of nowhere at the end of the game, that's what I'm talking about. That's the dumb stuff I expect from Sonic Blastman. But for the most part, you're just stuck fighting generic-looking bad guys who don't come anywhere close to matching just how ridiculous the rest of the game is. And I guess that goes for the stages as well. They look nice, but I'm just not convinced they really fit the tone of the game. I get that they're supposed to be standard Earth locations, but outside of hopping on top of a jet in level 2, nothing really feels like you're a superpowered weirdo doing superpower weirdo stuff. Most of these stages could have been pulled from just about any other beat-em-up. Even when the game eventually takes you to space, it basically just looks like a high-tech warehouse. Still, I guess I can't complain too much, because the fact that this game even exists and is as good as it is already feels like a small miracle. If you couldn't tell, I'm a big Sonic Blastman fan. The first game isn't exactly good, but I still love how dumb it is, and Sonic Blastman is really dumb. But as much as I enjoy the game for its sheer stupidity, that's not exactly a strong recommendation to any of you. But Sonic Blastman 2, though, that's one that I can actually recommend. It's not just ridiculous, it's legitimately one of the best beat-em-ups on the Super Nintendo, and somehow no one ever talks about it. I refuse to believe that I'm the only person out here that loves me some Sonic Blastman. And while I still have no idea who else this game was actually made for, I'm at least glad that it exists. And I'm even more glad that Mr. Blastman and his ridiculous Sonic-powered pecs are here for you to enjoy, if you ever give it a shot, which I totally think you should. Rival Turf for the Super Nintendo may have been the start of a solid beat-em-up trilogy by Jaleco, but it's easily the worst of the bunch. Rival Turf for the Super Nintendo was developed by Jaleco and released back in 1992, yes, with that box art, and was clearly doing its best to ride the coattails of a little game called Final Fight, which was all the rage at the time. Just flipping over to the back of the box gives you that whole, don't worry kids, we've got Final Fight at home feel to it. But to its credit, Rival Turf does at least include the two-player co-op mode that Final Fight was missing on the Super Nintendo, which does at least give it one leg up. So let's take a look at Jaleco's first crack at a brawler on the system and see if time has been more kind to it than I've been. Fire up the game and you're immediately dropped into Jaleco's low-rent version of what they thought a beat-em-up should be at the time. You get to choose between two characters, both rocking some of the best video game names of all time. Jack Flack and Uzi Nelson. What a f***ing name. Jack Flack is your lanky white guy with a thing for kicks, while Mr. Uzi is a slower, harder hitting dude that isn't afraid to wear a bright red cop uniform while doing it. Both characters share the same bare bones control scheme though, one attack button, one jump button, and not much else. But if you want to roll with the cool kids and you want to roll with the cool kids, there's only one right choice here. You pick Uzi and you never look back. In fact, if you're playing this game with a friend and they want to play as Uzi, you have to fight them over it, like with your fists. As mentioned, Rival Turf is about as basic a brawler as you can get, which wouldn't be a huge issue if it actually played well. But it suffers from a lot of those early Super Nintendo beat-em-up problems that just kind of crop up in a lot of these. I usually always say that some of these lesser beat-em-ups feel stiff, and if you want to know exactly what it feels like, go play Rival Turf. This game is as stiff as a corpse. Lining up enemies feels terrible, and even when you do line them up, there's a good chance your hits won't even connect. And even stuff that should be fun isn't, like picking up and throwing weapons. Like, this is one of the most simple things that you should be able to do in one of these games, but I cannot for the life of me get one of these to hit when I'm perfectly lined up. On top of that, you take an absurd amount of damage for a game like this. I'm not exaggerating when even basic enemies can take off half your health with a simple jab combo. Combine all that, and you're gonna find yourself going down way faster in this game than you would in most beat-em-ups. One neat idea that Rival Turf does manage to do is how it handles your super move. Instead of relying on a point system or just draining your health like most beat-em-ups did, Rival Turf instead keeps a running tally of how many enemies you've actually taken out right above your health bar. Once you hit 5 or more, you can unleash your character's super move, which unfortunately does about the same damage as just a regular throw. And that's if it connects with an enemy, which usually it doesn't. Still though, it's a pretty clever system for building up super attacks, so I will give the game credit there. And if there's another thing that the game does get right, it's level variety. Just about every stage is broken up into multiple sections. The first level alone has you brawling out into the streets, then onto a packed city bus filled with people who are just apparently used to this kind of thing, and finally outside of a stadium that you eventually go into in the next level. And while the early stages definitely feel like a dollar store version of Final Fight, the second half of the game actually drops you into South America, which is honestly kinda cool. It's just a shame that actually playing through those levels gets old really fast. So is Rival Turf any good? Well, not really. As mentioned, this was the first game in the Rushing Beat trilogy of games, and when you've got Brawl Brothers and the Peacekeepers that came right after this, then you really don't need to waste your time here, since those are way better games. Rival Turf does at least have some of that early Super Nintendo charm going for it, and I will admit that I did rent this one a few times as a kid, but that was mostly because there just wasn't that many games out for the system back then. It was a decent fallback in those dark times before much better games started rolling in, but still, I never really cared for it even back then. So no, I think you can just safely skip this one. There might be some dumb fun to be had if you're playing it with a friend and maybe an alcoholic beverage or two, but for the most part, I think this turf is probably best left unrivaled. Undercover Cops for the Super Nintendo is one of the few games on the system that genuinely shocked me, and there's not too many of them that ever did that. Undercover Cops started out as an arcade game back in 1992, developed by Irem. And while the game did pretty well in Japanese arcades, it never really got much attention elsewhere. But I wish I had seen it at the time because I would have absolutely loved this, and I think you can see why. It's dark, grimy, and super violent, to the point where I can't even show you a lot of the arcade version here on YouTube. And if you ever do get the chance to play the arcade version, I think that's the way to go, because it's just overall a better game. But we're not here to talk about arcade games, because believe it or not, this game managed to get a home port as well. Undercover Cops was eventually ported to the Super Famicom back in 1995. Unfortunately though, that release was only reserved for Japan at the time. Even though a Western release was planned, it just never materialized, at least not back then. And honestly, after playing it, I can kinda see why. Undercover Cops is set in a grimy, post-apocalyptic future where you play as a team of government-sanctioned street thugs tasked with cleaning up the city by punching everyone in that city. It's a pretty straightforward brawler, with each character filling their usual archetypes. Zan Takahara is your balanced main guy, rapid-fire kicking anyone's face off who gets too close. Matt Gables is your stereotypical heavy American brawler, complete with football-style tackles. And then there's Rosa Felmonde, the scrappy girl character who might actually just be the most brutal of the bunch, since she can just straight up grab enemies by the jaw and then hurl them across the screen. As mentioned, combat's pretty standard here, with your usual mix of punches, kicks, and throws, but each character does get a solid set of stylized attacks that really seem to pack a punch in this game. Outside of maybe like Batman Returns, this is one of the hardest hitting brawlers on the Super Nintendo. You're not just knocking enemies down with a few jabs here, you're swinging giant cement poles, ripping faces off, and sometimes just beating people to death with flaming barrels or rotting fish. You eat live animals in this game to regain health. It's just wild. And that same brutality carries over to the visuals, which is honestly what really carries the game. If you're like me and grew up loving those ultra-violent late 80s anime movies like Akira or Wicked City, you are gonna flip out over this game. Sure, it's not as polished as the arcade version, but the chunky, gritty aesthetic still works surprisingly well on the Super Nintendo. The environments are filthy and industrial, full of wreckage, decay, and all kinds of post-apocalyptic nonsense. And while most of the enemies just kind of look like super hobos, the bosses are what really steals the show, though. These are massive, messed up mutants with some truly wild designs and animation, like Francois, who starts crying and running around like a toddler after you beat her down enough. Or even the very first boss, who starts off looking like a guy that you'd avoid eye contact with at a Chili's, only to have a giant mutated endoskeleton explode out of his body halfway through the fight. This game's just ugly in all the right ways, and that's a compliment. I love games and movies that look dirty and grimy, and this is easily one of the grimiest looking games I've ever played. But unfortunately, those visuals can only carry things so far, because once the shock of what you're seeing wears off, the rest of the game's just kinda okay. Movement kinda feels sluggish even though you gotta dash, and landing punches can be hit or miss thanks to some inconsistent hit detection that seems to only really work when it wants to. This is also one of those beat-em-ups that just kinda feels like it throws in one or two extra waves of enemies at you just because it's trying to pad out the length of the game. And while those bosses do look really good, they're also some of the cheapest sons of bitches you're gonna run into in a beat-em-up. These guys will grab you non-stop or just hit you before you even get a chance to recover. The mole boss in particular nearly drove me to the brink of insanity. The game also suffers from frequent slowdown, which isn't too surprising given just how much animation and detail the Super NES is trying to push here, but it still drags the action down way more than it should. And that also probably explains why the two-player co-op got the axe here as well. The system was already struggling with one player, two would have probably just melted the cartridge. But even with all that, I really do like this game a lot. The art style and enemy designs alone are some of the wildest that I've seen in a beat-em-up, and they're almost enough to carry the whole damn thing by themselves. That said, the messy gameplay starts to show through once the shock of the visuals wears off, and it can't quite keep the fun going all the way through. But even with all that, it's still a solid beat-em-up, and definitely worth checking out for just how insane the whole thing is. And thankfully, tracking that insanity down isn't as much of a hassle anymore. The good folks over at Retrobit put out a localized version in 2021, complete with English text and full physical Super Nintendo cartridge. So if you've ever wanted to legally suplex mutants in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, now's your chance. And if you're into the weirder side of the Super Nintendo library, which you should be, it's absolutely worth checking out, whether it's the original Super Famicom version or the Retrobit release. Just be ready to wrestle with some jank while wrestling radioactive robot hobos. And that is gonna do it for me this week, kids, because I'm sure you guys are just probably sick of hearing about Super Nintendo beat-em-ups at this point. But I refuse to apologize, because I just love this stuff. And now that you know what I think about these, it's time for all of you to let me know in the comments how you feel about them. Or just let me know what some of your favorite weirdo games are for the Super Nintendo, or really any system, I don't care. Because there's definitely some weird stuff out there. And while you're at it, I know you see that like button there and just how tempting it is to click it, so let me be your enabler and tell you to click it as hard as possible to let me know that you like this video. And if you want to get completely crazy, just go ahead and hit the sub button as well to see more weird games like these in the future. But that's all I got for this week, guys. Check back next week for another fine selection of outcast Super Nintendo games, and as always, thanks for watching.